Hello everyone, and welcome to the inaugural session of Pearson's Speaking About Pedagogy and Practice in English Featured Speaker Series. I'm Amy Berger, the Executive Manager for Pearson's English Initiatives and Partnership Programs. I'm glad you could join us today, and I hope you'll find the ideas presented by our speaker valuable for your teaching. For those who are new to the webinar format, I have a few quick reminders before the session begins. If you're calling in by phone, please know that this is not a toll-free number. For that reason, we recommend that you select Use Mic and Speakers so you can listen toll-free through your computer speakers. You may notice that your line has been muted. This is to minimize ambient noise as well as interruptions for our speaker. We encourage you to ask questions using the box marked Questions on the right-hand side of your screen. You can ask your question at any point during the presentation, and when the formal presentation is over, I'll use the remaining time to pose as many of your questions as possible to our speaker. Any questions we don't get to will be forwarded along with your email address to the speaker directly, so all questions will be answered one way or another. If you want to keep up with the conversation on Twitter, follow @PearsonNorthAM and use hashtag PearsonLearn. Okay, so let's get started. Today's session is Bringing Leadership and Entrepreneurship into the Technical Communication course, and our speaker is Dr. Richard Johnson Sheehan. Richard Johnson Sheehan is a professor of rhetoric and composition at Purdue University. At Purdue, he has directed the introductory composition program and has mentored new teachers for many years. He teaches a variety of courses in composition and professional writing, as well as in classic rhetoric and the rhetoric of science, and has published widely in these areas. He was awarded the 2008 Fellow of the Association of Teachers of Technical Writing and has been an officer in the Council of Writing Program Administrators. He is the co-author with Charles Payne of Writing Today and their newest collaboration for composition, Argument Today, as well as the author of Writing Proposals, now in its second edition, and Technical Communication Today, now in its fifth edition. Technical Communication Today was recently chosen as the required text for those seeking certification by the Society for Technical Communication, so congratulations to Rick on that, in addition to his other accomplishments. In this session, Rick will focus on the ways in which the Technical Communication course can be seen as the ideal place to teach STEM students the principles of leadership and entrepreneurship, given that communication is a core element of leadership and invention a core element of entrepreneurship. Restructuring the Technical Communication course around these principles, however, requires rethinking the role of rhetorical strategies. Specifically, rhetoric and writing become less about persuasion and more about communicating generatively within networks of people. Rick, are you ready to get started?
Yeah, I'm ready, Amy.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that nice introduction. Let me see, I need to, looks like I'm going to have to ask me to, oh, my apologies everyone, but as soon as I do it, all right.
There you go.
Well, there we go. Well, first I'm going to apologize for my voice. I've had a cold all week, and it's finally worked its way out of my voice and into my nose. So, so if I sound strange, it might be for that reason. There's also some occasional rambling, but that's normal. But the cold medicine doesn't help, so I'll work that out. On the other hand, it's nice that it's a beautiful, classic Midwestern fall day here in West Lafayette. So I hope it's as nice where you are. So, well, let me get started. These are some of the other things that I've done. I've been 11 years at Purdue and 9 years at the University of New Mexico. I taught for 5 years in the Executive MBA program at UNM. So a lot of things I do come out of those kinds of experiences. You know, I'm the author of Technical Communication Today, of course, and I was happy to see that the STC adopted that. Kind of came out of the blue, but apparently they've been looking for a core text to use, and they chose Technical Communication Today. So I also have a company of my own called Phronesis, which does editing and consulting and communication. So, well, let's get started on the presentation. You know, I've been thinking a lot about leadership and entrepreneurship as a new way of thinking about the Technical Communication course. Most Technical Communication course in general would benefit from it, but I'm even thinking about the service course that's often a core of our offerings. You know, I mean, I think I really got started on this because I was working on a fellowship with the Oncological Sciences Center here at Purdue. We work with cancer research, And they were basically telling me, a lot of the things we need students to do involves communication, but we really need students to do is know how to innovate and lead and kind of, be good team players and stuff. And then I was talking with an engineering dean about, I got the usual, I went to this person's office because she tracked me down in a hallway after a presentation at some point and said, I really need to talk to you. So I said, fine. And after getting through the usual, none of our students can write kind of routine that faculty across campus seem to always give us, we got into discussing some other things. Now that our students can't write a story, I'm always a little suspicious of, because I tell you, here at Purdue, our students come in writing pretty well, and when they finish up with the freshman English sequence, even the second language learners write pretty well. So what I think faculty across campus are trying to tell us is students can't really write the things that we want them to write, like reports, specifications, white papers, the kinds of genres and things that they need students to write. They can write the heck out of a first-year paper, but since they're not getting technical communication until sometimes their junior or senior year, they're not able to write the things that their engineering and science classes need. So that was one element. That was the usual standard. But then the other thing we started talking about is, she started saying things like it's really important that they learn how to communicate in teams, that they can kind of talk to each other, not just face-to-face, but through networks, virtually, because that's becoming a really big deal with all the international stuff that's going on. And then she was talking about, we want them to be entrepreneurs, we want them to be creative, we want them to be able to get their ideas. They're doing a lot of pitches in their engineering classes, 2-minute pitches for new products and services, and students really struggle with some of that kind of stuff. They need them to speak well. I mean, it's no surprise that students in technology and engineering often struggle to speak, effectively in front of people. They're often rather introverted, and I wonder if they're even more so because of how much they're kind of locked onto screens and stuff like that. And yet, that's becoming a really important part of being in engineering. So what I think is going on here, and this has been going on for a little while, is that we're seeing kind of a shift from what we would call transactional forms of communication, where I have some ideas, I need to communicate them to someone else, and we're going to have a transaction, to more transformative forms of leadership. I think it's becoming less and less about writing about machines per se or procedures of some kind, and more about how we can kind of inspire people and motivate people. That technology is still really critical for communications, but I think there's a lot more going on here involving leadership. And that gets me thinking that technical communication is the ideal place to learn these kinds of transformative leadership skills and even entrepreneurship skills. I like to have students do a lot of different kinds of projects in which they're pitching ideas, pitching products, creating whole schemes around different kinds of technical devices and things that they want to talk about, and a lot of that's done in the technical communication course, and we're seeing more of that in the engineering courses, but not as much. And this might be a good place for this stuff to be happening. So let me start going into what I mean by all this stuff. Well, first, what is leadership? Let's get a definition going here. It's visualizing goals, motivating networks of people and technologies to achieve those goals. And some of the key words are visualize, goals, motivate, people, technologies, and achieve. It's not about being the boss anymore. I mean, I think that's what it used to be about, or being bossy sometimes. It's not really about the title or rank that people have. People, in the flatter management structures we have these days, everyone's supposed to be a leader these days. And so it's important that, people take on different roles in teams, and sometimes they're the leader, sometimes they're the follower, but everyone's expected to be kind of a leader at all, at any given moment. And what's entrepreneurship? It's the ability to recognize opportunities and organize resources in ways that allow the risks, rather than rewards, to exceed the risks. Some key words are ability, recognize, opportunity, organize, resources, rewards, and risks. Now, you're hearing more and more that the technology industry and engineering is evolving so quickly that you really can't have people who aren't thinking creatively anymore. You have to have everyone on the team who's innovating, thinking of what's next, starting, what are we going to do, how are we going to do this better, and things like that. That's what entrepreneurship means. It's not always about starting a small business or inventing a new product or service. That's a nice definition of entrepreneurship. But it's really about, as this nice definition from Howard Stevenson, it's kind of a classic definition. He says it's the pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources controlled. That's just not about small businesses. That's even if you're working for large companies. The ability to think like an entrepreneur at all times and be creative that way. All right, so I was sitting down after I talked with that engineering team and said, okay, well, what are some things what are some habits that somebody who embodies these ideas of leadership and entrepreneurship would have? And as it is, came up with 7. And so my apologies to Stephen Covey for taking his ideas of 7 habits of successful or effective people. But I know he's passed away. He's a bike rider like me, and apparently passed away riding his bike. So anyway, my apologies to him for stealing his idea, but let's go through these habits. All right, 1 is to plan strategically. 2, navigate networks. 3 is to communicate generatively. 4 is to motivate others. 5 is to develop genre know-how. 6 is to be ethically aware. And 7, present ideas effectively. So I'm going to go through each one of these kind of quickly. If you have questions about them, please send them my way. But I'll go through each one of them, try to explain how this looks in the classroom and with our students. So first, planning strategically. I'm always surprised that we don't teach students how to be creative a little more often. And I'm talking about concept mapping, brainstorming, storyboarding, all these kinds of things. If you're doing that stuff, great, but I often see how basically people want to move straight from product to writing about the product, or basically move straight into the kind of drafting phase without teaching a lot of creativity about how to be innovative, how to do kind of the concept mapping that I see done in technical workplaces. I was up at Los Alamos some years ago, and they were using concept mapping very extensively just to kind of share ideas and get some things out there. A lot of companies do with these, these called red teams and stuff that allow people to be creative. Students don't get that, just because they're creative people. They have to be kind of taught how to be creative. There's a lot of heuristics they can go through. 5 W and how questions. They can, there's a variety of different kinds of heuristics that can walk them through the creative process. They almost need, I think some people are more creative than others, but everyone has creativity in them. But sometimes people need to be taught what are some tools for bringing that creativity out. Strategic planning is an important part of this process. How to set clear objectives, all right? How to, so that allows you to establish a top rank objective, which is basically the purpose of your project. Then how to break that down into task lists so you can meet those objectives. I mean, I think students often struggle with projects because they just aren't very good at setting objectives sometimes. So it's a matter of sitting them down and saying, well, what are your objectives, and how are we going to break that down into a task list? And then kind of work on setting project timelines. It's something that I wish they were doing more in engineering classes sometimes, on how to set a project timeline, how to use especially backward planning, go from the deadline and work backwards to setting large milestones on when you're going to be getting to certain parts of the project, so that way your team can kind of stay on task. So that's one thing, that's one habit, to learn how to do some strategic planning. Navigating networks. I think that students need to learn how to work in teams, especially. I mean, it's not, people don't naturally just work in teams. If you think about it, most students' teaming understanding comes from 2 sources: working with their family. That's not always the best model for workplace teaming, or working in sports teams, which is a little better, but still, it's not quite the same as a typical workplace kind of team. I like to send students through Bruce Tuckman's kind of 4 stages of small groups dynamics. Basically, Tuckman argued that there's a forming stage where people kind of get goals set out, kind of establish roles, what's happening, get to know each other. There's a certain amount of nervousness and uncertainty with that period. But soon after, there's going to be a storming phase, you would say. And I've noticed this is pretty much true in most teams I've worked with. After a little while, there's kind of people get a little frustrated, they're not sure, they're uncertain about the project. they're questioning the leadership a little bit. When my students are in class and I'll go over and, you kind of can sense that things aren't going that well, and you ask them what's going on. They say, well, we're a little confused, a little frustrated. I say, great, we're in the storming phase. That means we're making progress here. They're often not as thrilled about that when I say that, but then I show them that we now can work through to get to the kind of norming phase that follows. That usually means reestablishing kind of what are the new roles, resorting out the what tasks people are going to do, and kind of restructuring the calendar to kind of get the project going. Now, most student teams aren't going to reach that performing stage, and because that's usually something that happens in the workplace when people have been together for a long time. They kind of can't anticipate what each other's strengths are and kind of sort information out. They don't even need to be communicating anymore about who's going to do what because they kind of know who's going to do what. If they reach the performing stage in a college course, that's great. But for the most part, I tell them, let's not expect that. We're going to be happy with norming. So anyway, that's the third habit is communicating generatively, and I mean that in contrast. I think usually we teach students to communicate persuasively and try and communicate clearly, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But it's helpful also to teach them how to frame issues in a positive way to their advantage. I notice that students often frame things from a negative perspective. Like, here's an example. Instead, a negative way of framing security issues is stop hackers from stealing your identity. Well, that's an effective way of getting your message across, but also puts the audience on the defensive. Now they're kind of like, well, okay, I don't know if I want to listen to that message because it sounds threatening. But if you can frame it from a positive perspective, like strengthen your personal security, now people are a little more receptive to hearing. It might not be as scary, but it definitely is appealing to their desires in some way. There's lots of different ways to do framing and reframing. You teach students how to do that so they can kind of talk from a positive perspective. Second part is creating identification. How can you find out what the people who you're communicating with, what are their values, what are their interests, what are their backgrounds, and then try to build an identity with them in some sense. You might be very different people, but you do share some values, interests, and backgrounds. You probably would be communicating in some way. So it's important. It's nice to teach students how to seek those things out and use that as a way of building a sense of identification with others. Telling good stories. More and more it seems like products and services are being illustrated with narratives, anecdotes, even hypotheticals. It's nice to teach students how to use that because I think it builds a bond with the people they're with or the audiences they're trying to talk to. And so I know narrative is not always something we teach in TechComm, but it's actually a pretty effective tool for teaching them as far as leadership and entrepreneurship goes. And finally, negotiating constructively. People have differences of opinion. There's conflict out there. It's nice to teach students how to go through ways of negotiating, and this means listening to all sides, figuring out where people are differing and then ranking those differences, and then kind of working through that list of differences to kind of seek some consensus. It doesn't always mean that people are going to agree on everything, but what it means is sometimes there's a lot of give and take that can be sorted out. And sometimes I've found that when you just ask people what they need, it's kind of interesting how they articulate things in a way that makes the problem pretty solvable. So I try to show students some of that kind of, that mediation that can happen. Motivating others, I mean, this is something that I think most of us are pretty familiar with. This is pretty typical transactional kinds of writing. How to use reasoning examples, logos, how to establish your reputation, use the reputation of others to support what you're trying to say. I like to even stress that it's okay to add passion and feeling into, I know that's not always something they're teaching in TechComm, but I think it's becoming more important in kind of an age where people are expected not just to transmit information, but actually kind of transmit a certain sense or feeling with it. So learning how to, teaching students how to motivate with logos, ethos, and pathos can be particularly helpful towards getting them to, kind of advance the message they want to advance. I think, and then of course I'm going to kind of go back to a central core of the things that I tend to focus on, but one of those is using genres. and teaching students how to use genres. Now, genres are patterns that reflect how communities, including STEM communities, get things done. I think that sometimes people are afraid that genres become kind of patterns or formulas that students kind of hold on to. I don't quite see it that way. Genres are really meeting places where authors and readers or listeners kind of meet each other and kind of understand what each other are doing. I like to think of them as interfaces where the two sides can kind of get together and in some sense make meaning together. So that's what I mean by genres are meeting places, and they're also meaning places. They're places where people make meaning together. Some of the genres that I think are common, but I think need to be taught to technical communication and engineering students are, correspondence, email, letters, memos, reviews, specifications, proposals, instructions, how to write instructions, activity reports, technical descriptions, analytical reports. These are some of the common genres that I think students need to kind of come out knowing. And a lot of this is important. Some of this is even coming back into freshman English. We're even teaching more of these kinds of things, so they'll transfer up to that junior level. And then from the junior and senior level, then they transfer into the career workplace. That's why when I often, I wish we had technical communication a little earlier in students' experiences, because then they would, those usual complaints you get about how our students can't write. But I think what I think the faculty are basically telling us is these are the genres we'd really like them to be able to write in, and they struggle because they're still trying to write like first-year English papers. So these are some of the genres that I think it's important to teach the students. And these genres go with leadership and entrepreneurship. Leaders in fields know these genres, and they know how to communicate within these genres. And entrepreneurs use these genres to build their arguments, to kind of be creative in a sense. So, obviously you're not an entrepreneur if you don't know how to write a proposal, or a white paper or things like that. So now it's a concept that we've been playing with. I like to play with, and several of us have been kind of working through the angles on this, or the concept of microgenres, which, these are smaller genres. They're patterns that reflect kind of micro activities in the workplace. Like one that I'm particularly interested in is this 2-minute pitch. Maybe most universities are doing this, but I know at Purdue we have lots of these elevator pitch contests. It seems like, especially over in the technical side of the university, we're seeing a lot more of this, and you can see them on YouTube. Just put in an elevator pitch contest, and you'll see a whole bunch at universities. I think the pitch is a great microgenre for introducing students to the larger, more complex genre of the proposal. Students really struggle with proposals when you teach them for the first time. But if you teach them how to write a 2-minute pitch, then when they can scaffold that up to a full-scale proposal in some sense. Some of the other ones that are in here, like a poster presentation, is a great way of kind of introducing them to the idea of how to write analytical reports. Obviously, they're pretty close to the same thing. The poster presentation is a nice visual, more outline-ish way to kind of move towards writing an analytical report. Customer reviews are a nice way of teaching students how to write evaluations, which is a more complex genre. That's what I like about these microgenres. They're pretty easy to get a hold of. They're easy to teach. They're kind of low-stakes assignments that can then be scaffolded up to larger genres that we want them to be able to write. Plus, again, if you look at most of these things do involve, how to be an entrepreneur, how to be a leader. I mean, knowing the microgenres of a field is often kind of the day-to-day activities that leaders and entrepreneurs need to kind of go through, to continue being successful. Ethically aware, this one's a little too hard to do in a short period of time, but I like to show students that there's different levels of ethics. Personal ethics, I like to do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. That's, of course, the golden rule. The silver rule, as they say, is the opposite of that one, which is don't do to others as you would have them not do unto you, or something along those lines. Google's got a little more simply put, which is don't be evil. And I think that's the silver rule for the current internet age. Social ethics, issues of teaching students how to navigate issues of rights, which are human rights, constitutional rights, how do they have them navigate things like justice, what are the laws that need to be followed, corporate policies, those are justice issues. Utilitarianism, which is usually defined as what's best for the majority, is probably the best path forward, with an understanding that the rights of the minority need to be protected. The issues of care, it's a little hard to explain, but I usually try and say it, if there's a fire and you have a choice between pulling out your father or perhaps someone who you don't know but is younger and has a longer life ahead of them, then issues of care allow you to step forward and pull your father out because of the family connections and things like that. Having students kind of navigate those ethics are important. And then finally, just environmental ethics obviously becoming much more important as we move forward, dealing with climate change and other things. The land ethic from Aldo Leopold's kind of a nice, he succinctly describes it as all ethics so far rest upon a single premise that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community, includes soils, waters, plants, animals, or collectively the land. I think the ISO 14000 standards that are coming in more and more into play these days are kind of a way of kind of codifying those ethics, and students need to be aware that environmental ethics are going to impact their lives rather significantly. I like to use case studies to do these, and some sites that are pretty good for teaching students ethics are like the Online Ethics Center that I think is still out of Case Western, but I'm not sure. Penn State has a really nice ethics site for engineering, so does Texas A&M. The National Society of Professional Engineers has an ethics area. They're great to send students to the case studies. They're good things to discuss in class, give students kind of that real-world experience of what real engineers have to deal with when they're weighing kind of the pros and cons of particular action. And I'll put in a pitch. Most of the TechComm textbooks that are out there have ethics case studies at the end of each chapter. Again, I think it's a great way of discussing different ways that problems are solved socially and ethically in the workplace, and it gives students a little taste of some of the complications that they may run into as engineers and people in the technical field. So, and my seventh habit is be able to present your ideas effectively. It's getting to a point where I think a lot of faculty are frustrated by our students' inability to kind of present things verbally, and because it's becoming more and more important, especially with video conferencing, including webinars like the one we're doing right now. It's important that students need to know how to speak effectively in various different kinds of contexts. So first, I think teaching students to speak with a beginning, middle, and end in mind. A lot of times they just launch into the details, just start, doing a data dump on you. You're like, whoa, wait, first you gotta have to give us the beginning, explain what's happening here. And then, the ending, teaching them how to end strong in some sense. A lot of them just, they get done presenting the facts that they have and they shrug their shoulders and go, oh, well, thanks, that's all I got. Any questions? Well, they just missed an opportunity to really end strong with their presentation. So teaching them to do that, have a beginning, middle, and end. Teach them how to handle questions. A lot of times, students are very threatened by questions, or at least they get very frustrated when people are asking them questions. And so I try and train them that there's three types of questions you get. There's an elaboration question. Hey, could you tell us more about this? Or I didn't understand this. Will you elaborate? That's really what they're asking there. There are hostile questions. People who basically are skeptical of what you come up with, or they want to, or perhaps doubt what you have to say, and you basically, the way to do that is to train students to say, I understand, we were even a little surprised ourselves that this was kind of the results we came out with, but in the end we checked our results and this is the way it ends up being, or this is the way we're going to go with this information. And then also responding to heckling questions. Especially, in the age of the internet, obviously heckling is becoming an art form. Knowing when you're being heckled and knowing how to kind of put off those hecklers, or how to get out of those situations and let others ask questions rather than keep going back to someone who's frankly just there to sabotage your presentation. So I think that's the kind of training we could do. Body language, I admit a lot of people go into technical fields because, they're not smooth as far as their body and stuff goes. How do you stand? How do you move? How do you gesture? Becoming increasingly important. Voice, rhythm, and tone. How to speak slower and lower with clarity. When you're speaking out loud or speaking to a large group, your tendency is to speak faster, which raises your pitch. And so students need to sometimes be taught how to kind of slow it down and speak with a little bit lower voice and enunciate clearly so people understand what they're talking about. And then as far as things go, today it's obviously a visual age. How can you teach people to show and tell? How to use graphics, how to illustrate things with charts and other things. It's become very important. You can't just get up and talk about things. You actually have to be visual also. I guess the thing about going back to leadership and entrepreneurship, public presentations are happening all the time. Obviously, there's times when you're giving a webinar like this, or you're giving a speech in front of people, but a lot of times those public presentations are someone taps on your door, looks over the cubicle, and says, "Hey, could you come down the hallway and talk to management about the project you're working on?" Well, you're about to make a public presentation, and it's important that as you're walking down the hallway to talk to management that you can kind of figure out some basic things you're going to have to do and kind of work through some things you can go to get your presentation ready, even though it's going to be a rather impromptu affair. So those are the 7 habits that I can think of. That I think a good leader and entrepreneur would have. I'll go through them one more time, which is to plan strategically, navigate networks, communicate generatively, motivate others, develop genre know-how, be ethically aware, and present your ideas effectively. I think if someone had those 7 habits coming out of my class or when they finish their degree in a field of technology, I think they'd be pretty effective leaders and entrepreneurs. So just a few final thoughts. I think that this is the future of technical communication. This is the way I'm shifting things, even in the textbook that I have. It's going to be more about teaching students how to be transformative leaders and entrepreneurs about writing documents. Writing documents is going to be important. Communicating information is going to be important, but it's going to be a lot more about how do you step forward and be a leader, be a team player, take on your role in a very fluid and evolving environment, and how are you going to continue to be creative, how are you going to be innovative, how are you going to come up with new ideas. Technology field's shifting very quickly, and so the ability to kind of adjust with that is really critical. I was just listening to the former CEO of Google on the radio just a few days ago, and he was kind of like, we're looking for people that can kind of adjust quickly and move quickly because good ideas only last for a little while, and then we're on to new stuff. So they're looking for people like that. I think if I can go to my last point here, which is that we got a golden opportunity to fill this role in the preparation of STEM students and professionals. I'm sure the folks across campus at the engineering and technology programs are interested in doing some of this, but I think we are specifically in a good position, those of us who teach technical communication, to teach these leadership and entrepreneurship skills that they're really starting to value and help students. Plus, I think students are excited about that too. They want to learn how to be entrepreneurs. They're interested in being leaders. So, all right, well, that's what I've got. I want to thank you for tuning in, and if you have questions, I'd be more than willing to answer them. I put my email right here, so if you want to send me something offline, or I should say through a different route, that would be fine. So we'll see.
Thanks so much, Rick. Well, I have a question, and it's a little bit off topic, so if you don't feel like speaking to it, we can talk about it some other time. But I was thinking about years ago when I first adopted your book, Technical Communication Today, for a class I was teaching. I was struck by the way that your book was different than a lot of others in that it positioned technology as generative of ideas and not just a mode or a way of now we have technology, so we type things up in a computer instead of a typewriter, kind of a thing. So like I remember thinking about the way that a lot of your assignments were constructed around the supposition that that students came to ideas through, using technology at various stages of their development of ideas and of texts. And so I was thinking about that idea of generative versus, persuasive, or generative versus conflict-oriented in your in your talk today. But so I kind of was just bringing those two sorts of thoughts together, and I was thinking about, with entrepreneurship and leadership, and as you said earlier, so many things are happening in online environments. I found myself wondering, what kinds of technology-based or multimodal, or whatever you want to call it, assignments are you finding to be most effective in this kind of leadership, entrepreneurship focus in your technical communications courses?
Yeah, I'm going to probably take that one in pieces. There are a lot of parts to that question.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I've been thinking a lot about what people used to be taught was kind of a monological, kind of persuasion-based way of writing and speaking, which is I'm going to stand up and I'm the single person. I'm going to talk to an audience of some kind. Mm-hmm. And that was very persuasion-based, right? I'm not saying that's not important now, but more and more important, it's the ability to kind of communicate in whole networks of people. Where you might be the speaker for now, but somebody else is speaking. And I think that's what's becoming more and more important for people in technology, technological communities to be able to do. For one thing, everyone's speaking through their computers, mobile phones, tablets, whatever they have, so they're in constant communication in some way. So the network is always kind of up and running all the time. But that's how people want to make decisions. They all want to be in the loop. They want to be communicating. And I think that's an important part of the creative process that's going on. I think when I first wrote TechComm today, and this was early in, this was still 2004 or something, it's amazing how much things have changed since I even wrote the first edition of that book. But it's, I think people were still thinking very much in that kind of more transactional way of communicating, where there's going to be a transaction going on. So at that point, technology, that was pretty novel. Now I think people pretty much feel very comfortable communicating these networks, and they actually expect to be creative together in some sense. It's kind of a matter of harnessing that power. And you're talking about what are some assignments. I think students really need to learn how to do networking right in the classroom, even if it means that, like they're at the same computer bank communicating with each other through Skype or FaceTime or things like that. Working, I always try and have some virtual work days where they're basically going to be communicating with me, through, basically screens, because that's what they're doing in the workplace these days. Mm-hmm. They have to be able to communicate with people across the country and across the world in whole teams, and it's helpful if they learn how to do that through their screens. It doesn't hurt that they like it. They like to stay home and talk sometimes and kind of work through the computer. Those tools for collaborating like Google Docs and stuff, and using Dropbox and Drive, they got to know how to do all that stuff in order to succeed. And so it's good for them to learn it at the university.
Yeah, and I guess too, I would think that the whole focus of the class on entrepreneurship and leadership would also be pretty exciting for them and different for them. Do you find that are they kind of surprised to find you taking that direction?
Yeah, well, I've had students say this is the class where I'm doing real engineering, and I was like, no, this is your, because we're in the English department. I'm like, well, it's actually an English class, but I think they like coming up with new product ideas, and I tell them, they can come up with some pretty zany ideas. I'm just saying, just don't worry about whether it's really feasible. Why don't we just go ahead and try and work on this and see what comes up? I think often they get hung up with, well, that's not going to work. It's like, hey, let's just work with it and see what happens. And, sometimes they come up with some really interesting stuff, and they get really excited about what they're working on, solving real problems, because they're often problems that I don't even know how it's going to be solved. You know, I'm telling them, hey, let's transition this building to alternative energy. Let's, you know, let's come up with a new product, a new app or something, and they love that stuff and get really excited about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because it seems like you're kind of bringing, well, you know how there's that kind of division between process-centered writing and product-centered writing, or you know whatever vocabulary we're porting those ideas into right now. But one of the central ideas in teaching composition has always been that writing helps students not only clarify their ideas but actually move toward them and generate them. But whereas over in like technical and professional writing, it's often been more about the product. Here's what it needs to look like. Here's what it needs to do, and not talking about what that writing process does for students, or for professionals in those communities. That actually, writing about it is just as generative of ideas as it is in composition or creative writing or any of those other things. It's weird that those two things were kind of separated.
Yeah, and I think that's all getting blurred at all levels.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, I was hearing I wish I remembered his name, the former Google CEO. He's still in the Google system, but he's like, we are looking for people who can adapt very quickly. And he was even one of the stories he told, talking about someone who uses narrative well, but he was talking about how they had a couple employees who came to them with the idea that eventually became Instagram, and they just didn't recognize what they were looking at, and those employees left, went to Yahoo, got bought by Yahoo, created Instagram, and then are now bought by Yahoo. And he's like, I could hear the regret in his voice. He's like, we messed up. We should have been promoting those people and bringing them up through the ranks, and instead, we just didn't see the future there. And I think that's what's going on in technology industries. They know that you can come up with a good product, but guess what? Others are coming quickly to replicate what you've done, maybe improve it. So it's always a matter of, in some sense, always being an entrepreneur and an innovator. So it's no longer about just taking a machine and describing it for people, or something like that, or a product and describing it. It really is about, kind of being a constant innovator, and in some sense being a constant leader and kind of cultivating other leaders around you.
Yeah, and I've taken another way that same story becomes kind of paradigmatic of something you wrote in your session description, which is that at the core of leadership and entrepreneurship is communication. Because of course the Google CEO regrets that that he wasn't able to see the brilliance of the initial idea that became Instagram, but that's also a failure of communication on the part of its creators. It makes you wonder how many great ideas are out there just in any given moment that the people who are generating the idea can't communicate it clearly to those who could fund it or make that vision a reality. So it kind of brings all that together.
It's out there. I'm sure those innovators are now billionaires, but they're probably not crying too much about it.
Probably not. No, I don't think they're sad.
But anyway, it's I think that's a big part of it too. I think communication's at the core of all this. So I hope my talk today didn't give the impression that I'm not thinking that technical communication is still about communication. It's that's kind of the medium that all leadership, entrepreneurship kind of comes out of in some sense.
That's
and
right.
Be a good leader or be a good entrepreneur really takes a lot of different, it takes you being able to write well, it takes being able to speak well, to work in different media.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things going on there that students need to be trained in. And, I think that's kind of the world that we're moving into.
Well, it's exciting, too.
I think so. I think students enjoy it better when they see that multidimensional. It's not just about, describing the copy machine or something, or something. I often joke that sometimes that's what, people without imagination. They're like, well, here we're going to write a technical description of, the copy machine. It's like, what a yawner.
Oh,
There's so many
exactly.
projects that would be really interesting for students to get involved in.
Yeah,
So,
no, I know exactly what you mean. And it's mind-numbing to have to grade those things too. So like, really,
and, proposals, I mean, you haven't
yeah.
come up with some pretty interesting, innovative things, and students have lots of creative ideas. Geez, they're like 21, 22 years old often. They're
Hmm.
just brimming with creative ideas. And, if you kind of, let them be engineers, let them solve problems, they really go do some interesting stuff. So,
Yeah, I was thinking about proposals when you were speaking also that, like, it used to be that if you were, you know, doing a proposal meant you were writing a proposal and it had it's sort of an RFP kind of quality to it. It was very cut and paste. Here's the template, use this many words in this section. And I think that was the expectation both on the part of the writer and, the receiver of that proposal. But though the way in which, people bring their ideas to the market now is multimodal and multidimensional, and it's so much more dynamic. You wouldn't see what you were seeing. Even 10, 15 years ago, like just submitting this text. Here's my PDF of the proposal. There's an expectation that more is going into it.
yeah, I think the competition is just that much more. I mean, it's so easy to get your message out. I like some of the crowdfunding sites that are out there because
Hmm.
people are giving pitches. That's why I think the pitch is such a good assignment because,
Oh yeah.
students need to learn how to get things down to 2 minutes. I was even at a recent pitch thing where our engineering faculty were basically pitching ideas so they could get funding from the university. That's a very important skill, and that's happening at companies too, where it's like we've got only so many resources.
Hmm.
We want you folks to pitch your best ideas so we can decide where those resources are going to go. Now, if a student isn't, if a new employee isn't particularly good at that kind of thing, they're really at a huge disadvantage. So,
That's
um,
true. And yeah, that's true in every field,
yeah.
that yeah, being advanced, advancement in any career now is not just a matter of following the script and, putting in your time and you'll get bumped up to the next level. It's very
Yeah.
much about being able to communicate your ideas as a way of communicating your value to the organization.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, but that's cool too. It makes people better people.
It does. It does. It certainly makes them more reflective too, and that's always good when people have to reflect on what they say before they say it.
Hmm.
Would that the whole world would go that way, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, Rick, I really appreciate your time today, as always, and really enjoyed your presentation. We have lots of thanks and enthusiasm for it, and now we're out of time.
Okay, well, thank you. So
Thank
send me
you.
an email if you want to communicate with me.
Thanks for that, Rick.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. And bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I hope we'll be talking with you on a future session.